Hello, Opening Pathways viewers, and welcome. It's good to see you again. This is Tom Lenoble. I have Ben Narasin with me today. He is the founder and general partner at Tenacity Ventures. Ben, it's great to have you with me today. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Good. So tell me something. I'd like to get started. First, I'd love to hear a little bit about your business and also what was it that sparked your idea to do it? I'm sure there's a backstory to share.
Sure. Well, I've been an entrepreneur pretty much my whole life. I started my first business when I was 12, ran businesses of different sorts till I was in my 30s. Started one of the first .coms in 93, took that public in 99. And then I took some time off, moved west, ended up in California. And I saw this gap in the market between angel investing and venture investing. Angels were small and slow, and venture had gotten very, very big. In parallel to that, the cost of starting a company had plummeted. I mean, you could basically rent anything you wanted at very limited cost. So the gap was what is now called seed investing. Smart people, great ideas. They didn't need that much money to prove or disprove their thesis. So I started out in 2007 with creating one of the first seed funds in the world and did that for a long time. Then I did traditional venture capital for about 7 years, mainly at NEA, which is historically the largest venture firm in the world, phenomenal shop. But while I wasn't always doing seed there, they got out of the seed game. And so I spun out to start Tenacity. So Tenacity is the result of about 15 years of experience as a seed and venture investor and my desire to sort of do it the way I thought was best. And bluntly, the way that's best for me is pretty much on my own. I'm a solo GP. It works well.
So let's go back a little further back. What were some things that happened or role models you had that got you interested on the path you were in? So usually most people I talk to, something happened early on that sparked something that got them started on their journey. What was it for you?
Well, I mean, I think there were probably two or three things. One, I always loved the idea of having a business. I mean, when I was a far littler kid than 12 starting a company, I used to take sheets of stickers to school and sell them and, then go buy more and buy wholesale, sell retail. So I was always wheeling and dealing, and that was fun. My dad had a phenomenal work ethic. He worked at IBM his entire life, pretty much. Some people grow up with sports stories, sports scores, and such. We did not. We grew up with tales of business. This is an example how the Japanese took the market from the Swiss in watches because they embraced technology in the form of quartz when the Swiss said no and wanted to stay with mechanical. And so, from a market share standpoint, they really, really took a big jump forward. And so, I always loved business. And I'd say the other part was I had my first job when I was 11. I was a comic book collector and I got a job so I could collect more comics. I got a job at a bookstore that sold comic books. And I worked for 25 cents an hour in credit. I got a raise to 25 cents an hour in cash and 25 cents an hour in credit. And the second person they hired got the same deal. And I was very upset. Like, that's not fair. He didn't earn that. But anyway, the other formative moment when I decided to start my first business was I went to Comic-Con, which has become very famous for a lot of things like movie premieres. But back then it was just, well, it hasn't changed that much other than the movie premieres. A lot of nerds, a lot of comic books, a lot of comic book artists, Star Trek in a room, Star Wars in a room, stuff like this. And I went over to buy a comic and I, went to the dealer's table. I pulled out my, let's call it Action Comics number 100. And I said, I want to buy this comic. He said, okay, that's $10. And at the same time, a kid came over with a very similar comic. Let's call it Comics 102. And he said, I want to sell this comic. And the guy said, I'll give you $5 for it. And I looked and I was like, wait a minute, I'm paying 10, he's paying 5. I'm on the wrong side of the table. So that's how I started out in comics. And comics really, they're a collectible. There's a lot of lessons in comics that are applicable to many things. Running any business helps you. In terms of other than my dad, I'd say one of the things I learned was it was very rare to find people that were transparent and truthful with you. And when they did, it could be very hard to hear, but I eventually learned it was also very valuable. And so I've made it a hallmark of my own that I have no filter, will answer any question. And if I'm not going to invest in somebody, I'm going to tell them as quickly as possible, and I'm going to tell them why. I'm not going to shield them from the reasons. I would prefer to be helpful to them the way people were to me, and sometimes that was by telling them hard truths.
Yeah, I love these early stories. I was a slot car racer and I won all these championships. And I remember going with my dad as a little kid and they wanted us to pay entry fee. And I remember looking at him one day and saying, look, I just won the championship. Shouldn't they be paying me? I think he knew then something was going to happen on the journey for me. So tell me, I'm interested to know about your leadership style. Was there a pivotal experience that started you on your path as far as how you're a leader, or tell us about your leadership style?
Well, I think there were two interesting learnings in that way. One was that comic book job. I was working and I took a break of my own, sat down and started reading a comic book. And out of the corner of my eye, I see the boss running towards me. And I think, oh my gosh, something's going on. What's going on? And he goes like, I don't pay you to read. And it was like, wow, okay, so work means working every minute, not some of the minutes. I, you know, my dad also had a very, very strong work ethic and would take me into IBM with him on the weekends and stuff like that. So he could spend time with me, but still get his job done. So I think that I also learned many things about how not to manage humans by that guy. I mean, let's face it, he hired an 11-year-old kid and paid him in credit. I mean, that's not the hallmark of integrity. Um, but the other thing I would say that was fascinating, when I was long before this, when I was in school, there was a group called something like Junior Achievement. And you broke the class into groups and each started a company, et cetera. And so we started a company. We were going to sell scrubs, the clothing people wore in hospitals, way ahead of our time because now that's a whole public company. And I got elected president of that company. And so I decided that I would just tell everybody what to do and I would sit back and do nothing. And then I got impeached. And I was like, wait a minute. And so what I realized is like you have to lead from the front. Being in a position of power, being in a position of leadership, you don't get to just ride on everybody else's back. Now, in fairness, as a venture investor, I try to help in any way I possibly can. But at the end of the day, we are entirely to the credit of any founder we back. We are always riding on the shoulders of the great founders that we're fortunate enough to back and that are fortunate enough to make it through the entire rigorous, horrific experience of being a founder to get to some point of liquidity. But I will say one other thing. I'm not convinced I'm either employable or able to employ. I just don't, I'm a perfectionist, but I'm also a terrible delegator when I either don't delegate or I just delegate 100%. Like there's only two settings, 0 and 11. So that doesn't work. And I've had some bad experience with that. So I feel like it's not that I can do everything better than everybody. Obviously, that's never the case. But I can do what I do pretty well, at least from my experience so far. And when I give something over to somebody else, then I don't do it. And I actually love what I do, and I love almost every part of it. So even the parts that are a pain in the butt, it's still valuable and important for me to do it. And so I don't really want it. Now, I have an entire group of people that support me. I have a back office. I have a great legal firm. I have a great accounting firm. I have the people that do the nuts and bolts of things in the back that I'm not going to do, that are regulatory based or anything else. But from the standpoint of finding and helping and diligencing entrepreneurs, I need to be the one doing that. And I need to be the one helping them if I can. If they want my help, then I want to give it to them.
Yes. Yeah, tell us about when you were starting up this whole seed idea, which I fortunately have been the part of a few of those. I love it. So brings back good memories. But when you first started it up, how'd you get real traction at first? You were starting something new between two worlds. How did that happen and come about?
Yeah, so I had retired for a while. I'd gotten pretty bored. If you don't play golf, it's very hard to retire. And I played a couple times, but it never really took hold. I think you have to really love golf, and then you can retire successfully. Otherwise, you're screwed. So I was talking to a guy I knew from our kids' class. He said, "What are you thinking about doing?" I said, "Well, I think I need to get back out there. Maybe I'll start a company. Maybe I'll look into this thing called venture, figure it out." And he said, "Oh, well, it was a large venture debt shop." He said, "We're looking for somebody to run the equity practice." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So we talked, and that ended up being a great fit because it was a platform for me. I had only 3 requirements that I was asking for, and one of them was that I'd be able to invest my own capital alongside. So I got to be part of the larger organization, but at the same time, an island. I used to say, I'm like Hawaii. I'm governed by the laws of the United States of America, but I don't see the homeland very often. So, we're our own little paradise. And that was great. I mean, it was sort of the reality is doing seed investing. And this was true when I was starting a brand, and this was true when I was NEA. It's not like you're getting, I mean, I get plenty of deal flow, but it's a non-stop journey to try to find those phenomenal entrepreneurs. I mean, over a course of 2 years, I saw 10,000 pitches and I only funded 6. So, I'm never worried about, am I seeing enough pitches? I am worrying about, am I seeing the right pitches? That's always tricky. And that's a never, how to figure that out is an eternal question.
Yeah, I love your golf story. I had a boss one time early in my career that told me if you don't play golf, you're never going to be anything in business. And I remember thinking, well, and I've never played golf and I did okay. So things worked out fine. So tell me, Ben, what did those early days when you were starting this teach you about trust?
Well, I have a strength and a weakness, which is I haven't lied since I was a teenager. And when you're like my father used to say to me, I lie, and that's a lie. So it's the truth. His point was like he just said a very every parent tells their children not to lie, but this
Yeah.
is sort of absolute sacrosanct concept, very high bar. And I really internalized that. And I was a teenager. I'm sure I told a lot of whoppers, but eventually I stopped. And I think it was when I went to college, I decided I'm just not going to do that anymore. Um, but the challenge, the reason that can be challenging is when you don't lie, you find a nice way to say things that, people want it when they, don't want to insult people. I'm not a total jerk. But you tend to, there's a concept of mirroring. You tend to treat others through the lens that you see in yourself. So because I don't lie, I therefore trust others to tell me the truth. Now, when they do end up proving to me that they've lied to me or deceived me or screwed me in any way, it's a lifetime effort on my part to get them back. I mean, I'm like an evil elephant. I still remember the guy at 16 years old for $50. So, it can be challenging, but I would rather live that way than the other way. And so I tend to be very trusting until you prove that I cannot trust you. Now, the other part is you just have to do a lot of diligence. Like when I'm getting involved with an entrepreneur, as I said, 10,000 pitches, funded six. These are 10+ year journeys, and you're often involved with the board,
Yeah.
you're certainly involved with the entrepreneur. This is going on for a very long time. Trust is an absolute. Diligence is key. And so there's two pieces of diligence. There's many pieces of diligence, but the things I care about, first and foremost, it's how much time can I spend with the founder? The more time I can spend, the better. I don't know if I'm a phenomenal judge of character or not, but the longer we spend together, the more likely I'm going to get comfortable that I'm hearing the straight scoop. And that's super important if I'm going to help you over time. Good news can take as long as it wants to get to me. I need bad news right away. No surprises is sort of rule number one. And then we do, background checks on everybody at the final piece. And that's where we find out, oh, guess what? You weren't as good at, like, I've only had it go wrong twice, or we made it to the end. And then in the background check, one guy had like 18 small claims cases against him. And I was like, wow, what? Tell me about that. And the answer was not good. And then I found another reference that was very negative. And anyway, so, but I got taken once and we'd skip the background check. And so we're just universal in background checks to try to have a second checkpoint against my own understanding. And I try to like visit them at their office and have them over to the house for whiskey in the pit and just, environments where they're comfortable or where they'll become comfortable and just try to understand them more as a person. There's a lot of folks out there, particularly some of the incubators, that try to teach entrepreneurs how to game theory it all out. And I think that's just a self-inflicted wound that haunts you for years because, creating the model that your investors are your enemy or that you need to like treat them like, the old saying, treat them like mushrooms, keep them in the dark,
Yes.
feed them shit. Like,
Yeah.
that's a quote from an entrepreneur about how they thought they should deal with their investors. That's not useful. Not if you want somebody to support you beyond just the capital. Look, when you put the capital in the first time, fine. But there may be a time when you have to be the guy that supports or the gal that supports at another time in one of a variety of different ways. And, if you don't have trust with the person you're doing business with, that's just, you're never going to go that extra.
Yeah, it's a long-term relationship to not have some element of trust and get to know people and know what they're going to be like in their um all situations. So a little whiskey in the pit sounds like a good idea to me.
Yeah,
So I've got,
I don't think you can BS me for 3 hours and three whiskeys plus maybe even a cigar. I mean, maybe somebody's that good, but
yeah,
eventually, if you can put a fake face on for that long, well,
yeah.
phone is an interesting asset.
Yeah, I'm not sure we want to work with people. They're going to do that anyway. So hopefully we don't get too caught up in that very often. So I've got a question for you, because you deal with a lot of companies experiencing this right now, where, technology's racing forward with AI. There's lots of controversy around it. I think it's the way of the future and obviously here to stay. I had the good fortune of watching one of the first faxes and thinking that was magic. And, then email came along, things that we're trying to forget as new things come. But as this happens and innovation is racing forward and there's an expense to it, okay, there's also this need for sustainability of how do we keep the lights on. Share with us your thoughts on that, how companies might look at that today, of how they keep up with technology as well as making sure they're addressing what's going on with the bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I found sort of disheartening, dropped into a class of negotiating at Stanford, and they gave both sides of the table a story. Here's who you are, and then they gave the other person another story. That's who they are. Now negotiate for an outcome. For some reason I do not know, I received both sides of the story. Maybe they made a mistake and handed me two sheets. Maybe it was because I was visiting. I don't know. And I sat down, and the person on the other side of the table just lied nonstop. And I was like, huh. But they lied in a way where it wasn't even leading towards the outcome that they needed. And they were putting themselves in extreme danger because there were certain things they had to have. And it was just, so I think there was a lawsuit long ago where some company tried to hide behind, well, priority one is, making sure the shareholders are taken care of, monetizing, blah, 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 shareholder value. And the court said, no, that is not true. There is no concept under the law that a corporation's number one job above all else is to maximize shareholder value. You still have to be a good corporate citizen. You should do the right thing. I like funding good people that do the right thing I've never had a evil entrepreneur in my established group of quite a few that I'm aware of. I'm not a double or triple bottom line investor, but I certainly feel a lot better when my companies at best can do good and do well at the same time, but at a minimum are just good people. And, part of it is entrepreneurship creates jobs. That's awesome. AI is a fascinating thing, and it's going to change in many ways almost everything to some degree. The need for energy, I think, will end up being a net positive. There was a program in the United States, and I actually know a guy I've met him before, but he's best friends with one of my best friends, who it was the first guy to have built a nuclear power plant in the United States in something like 30 years. And there was a program in work that took over a decade to get permitting, and now it got done in a month. The demands for power, first of all, supply and demand, right? So you have these mega scalers, the massive organizations, the hyperscalers, the Googles, the Facebooks, everybody else saying, we need X amount of power and we will pay for it now. And that brings nuclear online because it's the only way to get it done. And by the way, NEA was an investor in a fusion company, which is far better than fission. So there's a lot of opportunity to do things in a sustainable way. I was on a panel and someone's like, well, I'm just worried this is going to really crush, lower and middle income people with the energy costs. And I was like, why? Oh, it's all going to get used up by the big people. It's like, you understand there's not enough, right? So they're going to have to build it. And when they build it, it will bring down the total cost of power. China dumped solar cells in the United States and destroyed US solar companies, but the cost of solar cells has gone down so much, the net positive is almost certainly, for everybody. So I think there's going to be a lot. I'm not Pollyannish in that, everything will get fixed anyway at all, but there's plenty of people fighting both sides of the battle. And I do think in general, the evolution, if you look at the history of technology, everything we've feared ends up making things better. And whether that's because there's so much economic upside that people have to fund things, or because, a company's employees insist that they act in a certain way. So I do think, by and large, we have passed the time. I'm not saying there aren't evil corporations out there, but I think the time when you could do great harm and just look the other way and assume no one would care or notice, those days are long gone. There's way too many eyes on way too many things. It doesn't matter what you do anywhere in the world, it will be exposed,
It will
right?
be.
We don't need one guy with a camera in Tiananmen Square anymore. We've got billions of people sitting on a device. I mean, there's a better quality camera in basically the pockets of every person on the planet at this point, almost, than, the a $10,000 Leica would have given you 20 years ago. Yeah, instantaneous, all-knowing citizen journalism is a pretty powerful thing, which has been predicted by science fiction for forever, and now it actually works. People just don't call it that. I love hard science fiction. I think it's one of the best predictors of what the future might look like. A lot of these books.
Yes. So tell me, I want to know about a risky decision, like one of the biggest risky ones you made, and what gave you the courage to act on it.
I think there are four three straightforward. They're all financial in some way, but the first one was when I started my .com business in 1993. I went to my wife and I said, and I'd been using the internet before the web, but when Berners-Lee came out with www, I was like, oh my God, this is going to change the world for everybody, not just nerds like me. And so I went to my wife and I said, there's this new thing and I'm so excited. I really want my part of it. I think this is going to be the biggest thing I will see in my lifetime. She's like, oh, I totally get it. I mean, I knew what you were when I married you. You've always, because I would, from age 12 to age 37, there were probably 6 or 8 businesses. I would run one, I'd get bored of it, I'd take all the money and start the next one. It was always the same. Whatever I made, I put it all into the next one. And I said, I appreciate your support, but this one's a little different. She's like, what do you mean? I said, well, the business I'm running right now is making us a healthy living. I mean, we could live off this business pretty much forever and never have to worry. But if I do this new thing, I'm basically going to have to throw all of that away and put every penny we've made into this thing. And if I'm wrong, I will be bankrupt. And I'm pretty sure I'm an unhirable human being. I'm a sort of weird guy, and I don't have a good history of working for people. And, to her credit, she was okay with that. And, that business came within a week of being bankrupt. I mean, we were about to miss payroll. I had to go on bended knee to get a loan. I was out. I tapped. I mean, I at one point was advanced $200,000 on credit cards, and that was only because that's all I could get. Like, if you offered me a credit card, the answer was always yes, and immediately cash for the whole thing, right into the business. That was true for many businesses of mine. In fact, I remember my oven broke in a house we had in Boston. We called the landlord, and he said, just buy an oven and I'll pay you back. So we went to Sears. I said, what's the most expensive oven you have? They told me. I said, now give me a Sears credit card, which they gave me. I bought the oven on the credit card, got the cash from the landlord, and paid the credit card off over time. So I could, it didn't matter what I was doing. It's like, how can I get more credit? How can I have more fuel for this business? But the others were all just straightforward, difficult financial decisions. Like when I funded Lending Club, it was the largest check I'd ever written. I spent an enormous amount of time on diligence. I mean, there was no way, everybody says, there's a company called Obvious Ventures because they say everything that succeeds is obvious in hindsight. A lot of things are obvious at the time, don't work out and fail. So it's a classic cognitive bias, success bias, and people don't really understand that at all. They all think it was obvious and easy at the time. Oh, obviously you'd have fund Facebook. Really? Because, there were 3 just like it right before that grew like crazy that are all out of business. So
Yes,
you would obviously have funded Facebook. Would you have obviously funded Friendster? Because it went bankrupt, I think. Anyway, so they were all different, large at the time financial decisions for me. The one that I think illustrates my thinking on risk and how I got comfortable with it, which I think is your primary question, was a company where I seeded them, and out of 180-ish companies, it was the only time I ever wanted to lead the Series A. Meaning I don't do Series A's, but I was going to personally share and co-lead the Series A in this company. And I went to the entrepreneur, I told him, I want to do this. And he said, okay. And I said, but you should know that this is a very material amount of money for me. And he said, oh, well, how material? I said, well, if you went out of business, I wouldn't die, but it would be like losing a financial leg. And he was like, well, I don't know if I want you to do that. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, I wouldn't want you trying to like pressure me to sell. I'm like, no. That's the opposite of what you have to worry about with me. I am doing this for the following reason. I call it solve for regret. Take 2 paths. In one case, I take this massive amount of money, relative, I put it in, and you fail. I've now lost a financial leg. I'm crippled for God knows how long, but I'm going to survive. That's one level of regret. The other one, I don't do it. I don't lose any money, but you go on to achieve what I think you can, which is to be Google for mobile. And I'm not on the board, didn't do your Series A, had the chance. It's like the guy that got approached to be the CEO of, call it Google or any major company, and said no. Like, to me, the regret I'd have for that is infinite. I never stop thinking about how I could have been that guy. I could have been on the board of Google. I could have been Series A backer of Google. It wasn't Google, but metaphorically. On the other side, I'll get over it eventually. And so when my own founders ask me difficult questions, I say, look, I don't have answers. I do have questions to help you think. And one of them is, which would you regret more? Do the thing that if it goes horrifically wrong, but you have 2 options, which horrifically wrong one will you not be able to stand living with?
Interesting. Yes, yeah. How do you decide when to pivot or push through?
Well, that's never my decision for founders. Although it is pushing through as a constant decision. So I will always say to founders, I don't love pivots. I don't mind tacking into the wind. I like a sailing term. It's funny because someone was interviewing me and they used a different word, and I was like, oh, you don't know what a tacking in the wind means, do you? Um, but I think that if you're willing to give up, you should never be an entrepreneur in the first place because the times will get exceptionally hard. One of my, there's certain pieces of advice I've recycled many times, and often I will get more outreach from an entrepreneur in difficult times. That's always the case. The hard times are when they need you the most. And it'll be difficult. Maybe, death could be on the horizon. And I'll say, look, one thing, Tom, you need to remember, it is always darkest before it gets even darker. And only then do you have a chance of making it to the light. I don't care
Yeah.
how bad it is now, it's going to get worse. And you need to own that and you need to charge into the darkness and you just need to keep fighting because you just can't give up. In 18 years of doing this, I have told one entrepreneur he should give up. He was in it for so many years, making no progress, just scraping by. And I was like, at this point, I think you should land the plane and get a job. Like, you're not gaining. Like, every entrepreneur, every VC wants their entrepreneurs to run through walls, eat glass. Well, I do want you to run through walls. That's required. But if the wall turns out to be 40 bricks thick and your brain matter is coming out of your ears, eventually you got to say to yourself, I can't get through this wall. Not all things work. So, having said that, though, it's sort of like I do CrossFit, and there's a lot of metaphors in CrossFit that I like for entrepreneurship. And one of the things they try to teach you is, and this is true in many disciplines that are physical, your mind tells you you're done when you're somewhere between 40 and 60% of the way to the capacity of your body. And I'm not claiming I'm an elite athlete, I am not. But one of the things they talk about is how one of the reasons elite athletes and elite soldiers are able to do what they do is they're actually able to understand what their bodies are capable of. Like in the Navy SEALs, you have Hell Week and you go for a week with basically almost no sleep. And you can actually do that and survive. Well, it's similar with entrepreneurship. Like you have the capacity to
Yes.
go harder and further than you realize you can. And another thing I stole from CrossFit as a quote from my coach, it doesn't get easier, you just get better. You build up endurance, you build up, you are just more able to handle it. And then you go to the next level, and then you go to the next level, and then you go to the next level. And that's critical. But eventually, the other part I'll tell them, like sometimes I've had this happen maybe 3, 4 times where they come back to me, it didn't work. It's not going to work. We've got 50 cents on the dollar left. I want to give it back to you. I was like, I don't want a refund. I funded you. Go figure out something else.
Yeah.
And so I'd rather stick with the entrepreneur, even in a pivot, if the other option is thank you for a refund on my money, partial refund. But I would prefer, like to me, the difference between a pivot and tacking into the wind, a pivot's when you turn the boat around, sail it back to shore, kick all the sailors off, and come up with a whole new group of people to go do a whole different thing. I don't like that. That usually does not work. But tacking into the wind is when you're sailing in a towards the northern light you've created for yourself, which is always critical for any entrepreneur. And there's a stronger wind just off the bow, and you want to accelerate into that. That's perfectly fine. Finding a variation of what you're doing that makes sense isn't pivoting, it isn't giving up, it's just being smart. One of my favorite stolen quotes from a VC is firm on vision, flexible on path. You need to know where you're going, but maybe the path's a little different than you expected.
Yeah.
Maybe that's part of how you're getting there, or maybe it's that you thought you were going to an island. Hey, the United States of America was supposed to be India. Worked out just fine, right? I'm sure nobody's unhappy with if they're the heirs of the people that first discovered and landed here as long as they survived, right? Like, they came here looking for one thing and they found something else. It was a pretty good thing they found. So if you find something that much more awesome than what you were looking for, sure, take advantage of it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I know some of my darkest paths ahead turned out to be where the best treasure was. So,
Yeah, yeah.
and
Serendipity is a very powerful thing.
yeah, it is.
It's
Yeah. And I know
required.
you've seen this. I have clients that I work with, and you can see they're on the verge of success, but they don't see it themselves. And trying to get them to not fall off that cliff and to stand there a little longer and maybe take a fly or something is sometimes difficult, but you can see it happening, but they got to see it for themselves sometimes. Tell us about your leadership style. How do you lead?
I mean, I guess what some people would call, and I almost laugh at it, servant leadership. So
Servant leadership?
I'm here to help my founders. I have a pretty strong point of view on things I've experienced. I'm a huge fan of other people's quotes. I wish I knew where they all came from, but Mike Maples, who's a great seed investor, quoted another investor who I don't know who was. And the quote was, if we've got data on, if you and I are having a disagreement, Tom, if we've got data on this point you and I disagree on, we need to take a hard look at that. If we're talking opinion, we'll go with mine. That is pretty much me. It's my wife gets mad at me sometimes because I'm a confident human. There's another quote I stole from Venture, which is my version of it is seldom wrong, never in doubt. The dangerous people are the ones that are often wrong, but never in doubt. So she gets mad at me like, why are you so confident? You are so sure it's got to be your way. You think you know it's right. It's like, honey, obviously that's not the case. Nobody is always right. But if we look at the data, you'll see that I usually am.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to opine on something just because I have a thought. I've been to Hawaii. I just look around my office. There's a book about Hawaii. I've been to Hawaii, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 times. You want to talk about Hawaiian history? I'm not going to pretend I know something just because I heard a story once. No, but you want to talk about some level of entrepreneurship that I've been involved in? Yeah, absolutely. I always say to my founders, look, there's 3 sources of advice. Experience, generally very useful, but you should always make sure it's still current and relevant because some things change and that can hurt you. Opinion, dangerous, or at least questionable. You need to understand where that opinion is coming from, what it's based on, and then hearsay. That's the dangerous one. The person says, oh, well, at Facebook, Zuck did this. Really? I didn't realize you were an early investor in Facebook. Oh, I wasn't. Oh, but Zuck. Social. No. So, I saw it on the Social Network, the movie.
Yes.
Thank you very much. There's that saying, you can keep your mouth shut and be perceived as an idiot, or open your mouth and remove all doubt. It's like you quoting something you read or heard on a podcast. Like, it's not that none of that material is useful. If you weren't in the room, how do I know that you got something useful for me to know? You don't know the nuance. You weren't there. Oh, that's good to know. Hey, Zuck has body birds. You should get some too. Really? Really, is that a thing? Or you should talk to Bill Gates. He's funding a lot of stuff in that space. Oh, can you introduce me? Oh, I don't know him. Well, how do you know he's funding it? Oh, that's what I heard. Good. Thank you so much for the worthless throwaway advice that you can't help with. It's like when an entrepreneur asks you to, I would say, by the way, encouraging entrepreneurs to ask questions is better than trying to give them an answer. An entrepreneur called me once. He said, remember when Greek debt was at risk and I thought the country was going to default? This is quite a while ago after the financial crisis. He's like, I'm really worried about Greek debt. I was like, why? Well, they could default. Are you sitting on a lot of Greek debt? Did you invest a lot of the company's treasury into Greek debt? No. So what are you worried about? He said, well, it could really crush the economic system and could hurt our banks too. Okay. Do you have any control over that? No. Do you have the ability to influence it? No. Will it have a direct, immediate impact on you that you can mitigate? No. Then stop worrying about it and just focus.
Stop worrying about Greek debt.
I worry about things all the time, but if I'm in a plane, I'm not worrying about how to quickly learn how to fly just in case something goes wrong. Not a useful path. Where you can have impact or plan to mitigate, sure. If you have a path where you can mitigate the collapse of an entire country and its impact on the rest of the global economic system, go ahead. Maybe there's an insurance product out there you want to buy. But, worry is one of my favorite sayings. I wish I could live it. There's 2 that I don't live, wish I could. I live them better than I used to. One is, worry is a dividend paid to trouble in advance.
I love it.
I love that because nobody pays dividends in advance in business. And I wish I could not worry about things. And the other is, you can get mad. Don't let your money get mad. But when I get mad, because I trust people, if they do screw me, I stay mad forever.
Yeah, I love the worry one. It's sort of like, what do a rocking chair and worry have in common? They both keep you busy, but don't get you anywhere.
Okay.
Yeah. So tell me, what values are non-negotiable?
Well, trust, honesty. I would say tenacity, integrity, grit, drive. Those are all mushed together. I mean, first and foremost, like, if the trust and integrity piece, there's just honesty. You're going to make mistakes. I just need to know I'm dealing with the facts. because I cannot help you if you're lying to me. I don't even love it if you're exaggerating. Um, the fund is called Tenacity for a reason. And so I spend a lot of time trying to see if people have that in them, which is very hard. There's no question, there's no questionnaire, there's no like, developed survey that came out of some school that tells me your personality type, or I do your Enneagram and I'm like, oh, you got tenacity. So, that's those two things. Brilliance also. I mean, you just never met a dumb entrepreneur that was any good. Doesn't mean just because you're brilliant as an entrepreneur
Great
that you're
quote.
good.
Great quote, Ben.
Well, I always say I need five things to make an investment: people, 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 great idea, huge market if it works. But when I talk about the name of the fund and tenacity and the importance of it, I say, look, brilliance is assumed, or I would not have funded you. A great idea is assumed, or I wouldn't have funded you because I don't like pivots. And a huge market's assumed, or I wouldn't have funded you. So, from a must have, those things are all true right at the beginning, or there's never a second conversation. I mean, in the 10,000 pitches we saw over 2 years, a much quoted number by me, maybe 5 dozen, 4 or 5 dozen went to second meetings. Even a second meeting is pretty rare. It usually falls apart on size of market. Sometimes it falls apart on idea. It's very rare for it to fall apart on quality of people from at least a first blush of intellectual capacity. Because in this community, the wonderful thing about being in the Bay Area is we are Florence and the Renaissance. The best and brightest come from all over the world to be here. It's the most diverse array of folks I've ever seen anywhere in the world. And you never know whether it's going to be a Ukrainian founder or a Polish founder or a Spanish founder or an Indian founder or an Asian founder from other parts of Asia that aren't India, because I always find it odd they lump those together. I get that it's Asia geographically. Um, so you just never know. Obviously, there's a concentration of certain groups, groups that happen to have a rich history of caring about education and engineering. But, it is very, very rare. I mean, I can only remember 2 or 3 times leaving a meeting and thinking, how did this person get to this point in their life? Like, wow. And that's out of thousands and thousands of meetings a year over 18 years. So it's super rare that, maybe just because people self-select out. Also, being an entrepreneur is so much harder than people think. It doesn't take long to figure that out. And I think that weeds out a lot of people pretty quick.
Yes, yes. So tell me this. You have plenty of metrics that you watch in your business and about your companies and many other things, but how do you define success beyond metrics?
Well, I mean, it's interesting as if you got to think about the role I play. One of the reasons I'm not a double bottom line or triple bottom line investor is I think that it narrows the aperture too much and eliminates your chance to have all the right opportunity for upside. I am a general partner. I take money from limited partners. My job is to make them money. Now, admittedly, sometimes my job is to make rich people richer. I would love it if I only had charitable organizations and philanthropic individuals and, schools and hospitals as my LPs, but that's not reality. I mean, I have normal people. I have lots of fund to funds and family offices and all kinds of stuff. They're perfectly good people as far as I can tell. There's only two I don't like, and I'm not inviting them back for fund two. What's one of the privileges of being a solo operator is I can pretty much decide what I want to do. We were oversubscribed the first time. I hope we will be again. So I don't have to take any money from any place I don't want. I'm pretty much it's domestic, a little bit of LATAM, a little bit of EU. Anyway, but my point is my LPs are not going to applaud me because I learned so much from an investment. Because, I reduced the temperature of the planet by half a degree, unless that company gets liquid. At the end of the day, there has to be liquidity. And this was an interesting Rubicon for me to cross in an understanding way as an entrepreneur, because I wanted to build a lifetime business. And I was always sort of bothered by the more venal nature of the investment community. And the reality is these funds are built to last 10 years with typically 2 one-year automatic extensions. Now they're even going longer, so you might think 15. But at the end of that period, you need to have given that money back. An LP gives you money, not just to keep it forever, but to invest it and give them back more than they gave you. So in the industry I'm in, success is very specifically defined as how many multiples on the money you put in, I give you back. I've personally had some very good results in that way. And the current fund is apparently as good as it can be, pretty much. But I do need to, first of all, my journey is very long. This is a 10-year journey. Um, I love that I often look, being a VC is one of the most, it's probably the perfect version of continuing education for an ADHD guy like me. You're always learning something new. Every conversation gives you the opportunity to learn about something you didn't know anything about before. And that's awesome. And then riding along with companies that go on to success or to companies that go on to failure is a great teacher. It enhances the wisdom you have. But net, my LPs, if my, I was a D&D'er, I've got lots of D&D paraphernalia around here. There's a difference between intelligence and wisdom. First of all, there are two different scores. You roll for each one. Intelligence you're born with. Now you can utilize it or not, but net, the theory is if your IQ is 120, it's 120. It's not going to 130 and it's not going to 110 without a physical injury. But wisdom is gained over time. And so if I had by the way, for those of you that are watching that don't play D&D, it's an 18-point score, 3 six-sided dice. So if I started off my journey with a 12 in wisdom and I finish it at some point in the grave with an 18, the highest possible score, well, that's awesome for me, but I better have made my LPs money along the way or they're not going to care at all. They need to see return. And they're very patient. I tell them it's a 10-year plus journey. But it's really awesome to see an entrepreneur go on to succeed at some vision they had. Look, they all want to make the world a better place in some way. It may be, if you ever watch like Silicon Valley, the TV show on HBO, yes. We're going to change the world. We're going to make the better place for engineers deep in the stack, optimizing their J code, blah, blah, blah. It's like, what? But they all have something they believe is a problem that they need to fix. Some of them fix problems that are very, very material in the world. Some of them fix problems that are just orchestration inside of business or whatever else. But it's really great to see when it works. And I would argue it's also important to see that it works and is done in the right way, meaning there's no corners cut. Well, I don't care if you cut corners. I care if you break laws. It's like when you sell a company, when I don't sell companies, but when my entrepreneurs get acquired, they will usually have a document that the investors have to sign. And I asked a friend of mine early on, I was like, because I actually read these documents, and it said, I have to indemnify the buyer against any fraud, criminal activity, blah, 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 basically everything. And I said, do you guys sign these? And he said, no, we're private equity guys. We never sign those. UVCs sign them all the time. I'm like, I can't sign this. And I told the entrepreneur, look, you're going to have to drag me along. I can't sign this. He's like, why? I was like, look, I've known you for a long time, and I don't believe this is true. But I've seen you once a month. You could be running an organ farm in your basement, and I would not know. I've never been to your basement. I have no idea what corners you cut along the way. So I don't think you did anything wrong, but I can't represent to it. And if I can't represent to it, I'm sure as heck not going to sign this thing indemnifying these other guys for it. So, it's, and by the way, sometimes the world changes. I had a company called Cabbage, which was awesome. They did lending for small businesses. They grew like crazy, did an exceptional job. COVID comes along and the government pushes them really hard to help get those loans out for the businesses that, need to keep their people employed. I forget what they were called, but there was not a TARP loan, but some sort of loan. Anyway, so they work really hard. I think they're like the number 2 provider of these loans, and they get the loans out and they do it the right way as far as I can tell. And the government says, no, you're good. Do more, do faster. And then the administration changes and the government sues them. So, you didn't do it right. You didn't spend enough time on it. You went too fast. There was fraud out there, whether they were involved in it. They weren't involved in it, but as you know, there was a lot of fraud during COVID. Faked out, they pretended they were you and applied for your last 12 tax returns and said they wanted a refund after they did a fake revision. So anyway, it's like, we did what you told us to do, and now you're suing us for doing it? Like those sort of things. Well, I just don't, the government's, it is what it is, but it changes all the time. And then you have to worry about whether somebody that's new hated the guy that was there the last time. And then you got to worry about whether they hate you because you were involved in something the guy that was there the last time asked you to do. Anyway, so I like it when my entrepreneurs do exceptionally well. I particularly like it when they do it in a good way. And if it creates benefits in the world beyond that, that's awesome also. It just has to be an also.
What are you most hopeful about for the world today?
I think we're in a wonderful place. And there's a book out there it's not called Optimism, but it's something like that. And it's a great debunker of the sadness that people spread in the media about how bad everything is. It's not bad. It's great. And it's great for every socioeconomic tier on the planet. One of my favorite stories, there was a president of the United States. It was not recent. It was like, call it 40 to 60 years ago. President of the United States, arguably most powerful person in the world. His son got a cut. It got infected. He was dead in weeks. Today, I hope I'm never there, but if I'm living on the street eating out of garbage cans and I cut myself on a rusty garbage can, I can go to the hospital, get treated, and not die. That alone is fascinating and awesome. The book's called Abundance, I just remembered. I mean, it is, yes, there's an enormous spread because the wealthiest have become outrageously wealthy, but everybody has gone up in a pretty significant way. Now, I find it slightly odd that everybody believes they should be able to live in any city they've ever lived in, because I lived in New York City as a college student. At one point, I considered living in a storage space because I couldn't afford the flip and rent. But I didn't say to march out on the street, try to elect a socialist mayor and say, you need to force these people to give me an apartment I can afford. Well, it's New York City, dude. You can't afford an apartment here. Why don't you move somewhere else? No, no, no. I want to live in New York City. Give me an apartment. Why? Well, how did you earn that? So anyway, I do think in general, I was just talking to somebody that came back from Salt Lake City, and they've done a tremendous job of being able to give. They have almost no homeless population, according to him. They've given them all apartments. They have to do work to get them, but like they have the Mormon Church, and I'm sure they were helpful in both the financial and individual realities of that. So I do think we're in a great place. I'm a techno optimist, if that's the way to pigeonhole me. If you look back over time, all the way back to the famous Luddites, technology always makes it better. When I started looking into autonomous driving, I wasn't interested in cars, but I was really interested in trucks. Well, truck driver is the number one job of headcount in the entire world. And it's the number one job in over half the states in the United States. And I was worried, well, what happens when an autonomous truck takes that job away? And I started looking at prior autonomous efforts. And there were two that really stuck out. The first one was, one of the very first robots to be deployed in mass on the planet, but certainly in the United States. It was the gas station robot. I'm not talking about a humanoid that pumps your gas. It was the credit card reader. That's a robotic instrument. That is a box that used to be dumb that now has computers in it that says, I can read your credit card. I can find out if it's any good. I can turn on the pump. You can pump your own gas. I can turn the pump off and tell you how much you owe me. Wow. Pretty cool, right? Guess what happened? A lot of gas station attendants don't have jobs anymore, except in 2 states, which are enormously frustrating because they do a terrible job. It's almost like keeping them in servitude. Let's make laws to keep people at the lowest possible income level. It's crazy. And don't even get me started about the elevator operators in New York City that push a button, which there are still some of. So anyway, what happened? All these people lost their jobs. They never got employed again. Well, no. Who owns grocery stores? Owned almost exclusively by immigrant families. What do immigrant families or anybody building a business want to do with excess profit? What, stick it in the mattress? Put it into T-bills? No, they reinvest. And so the reason we have what are currently called convenience stores and grocery stores inside of gas stations is because of the money that was freed up by those grocery pumping robots. And the thing about those locations is they need more employees than you needed to pump the gas. So 4 gas jockeys lost their job and 12 people, including the cashier, the people who had to clean the place, the rack jobbers. It's just all better. And the second example, not to belabor this, was the ATM. Oh, these poor banks. There's more banks now than there were before ATMs because it's cheaper to open a bank and you can have more service. And by the way, have you ever been to a bank that was just 12 ATMs and nothing else? Sure, there's ATMs around, but you go to a bank, there's still people there. So it's generally the case that automation and intelligence and robotics and technology raises all the boats up. And I think AI will be awesome in so many ways. There will definitely be a shift in who's at risk. And there will probably, like how you react to that's going to be critical. Like I was thinking about, there are plenty of jobs that cannot be touched by AI, but there are plenty of jobs that will be. The bummer thing is when you're remember when I said experience is a great source of advice, but you got to make sure if it's current? Well, 6, 8, 10 years ago, people said if you had a kid and you wanted them to be secure or her to be secure, make sure they learn to code. That was true for quite a while. Not quite sure it's true anymore. So it's like telling your kid to learn to play lacrosse because top tier schools need lacrosse players.
Yes.
Until everybody tells their kid to play lacrosse, and they're like, yeah, sorry, we really have a lot of lacrosse
Too
players.
many of them, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we need crew, we need violin, we need oboe. So if you're, that's a place where I could see a lot of, but these are super smart people that should be able to learn a trade. And also, by the way, it's not going to just be machines. I think somebody I'll make this final point on AI. They said, you are not at risk of having your job taken away from you by AI. You're at risk of having your job taken away from you by somebody else that's better at using AI at your job.
Yes.
That twofer.
Yeah, go learn it. Go learn it. Yeah, do something. Take an action. I've got one final question for you today. A lot of people watching this podcast are going to be people thinking about founding a company or starting down that path. What piece of advice would you have for a new founder getting started today?
Well, I guess there's two. Do not underestimate how hard it is. Being an entrepreneur is the hardest job in the world if you're not a first responder. If you're not carrying a gun or a knife or an axe or a hose, it's the hardest job there is. If you're in an office and you're an entrepreneur, it's the hardest job. And going back to success bias, we read about all this stuff. Oh, I could have done that. Really? You could have? Huh. Because it's not the idea. I guess there's three things. The second thing is ideas are worthless. Execution is priceless. Yes, you do need a good idea, but that on its own is of no value at all. I can tell you probably if I spend enough time, 100 ideas that I've had that have gone on to be enormous companies that I had nothing to do with. Doesn't matter. I didn't start them. I didn't grind it out for 18 hours a day. I guess another thing I'd tell you is if you believe in the concept of work-life balance, you will never be a successful entrepreneur, period. Don't even bother. Okay, you could argue with me about it all you want, but just save yourself some time and get a real
Yeah.
job. Okay, because they'll let you have your work-life balance and you can complain about it. Who are you going to complain to if you're the entrepreneur? Oh, my work-life balance. What are you going to go complain to your employees? Are you going to complain to your clients? Oh, Mr. Client, Mrs. Client, I really, we needed to work 18 hours a day for the entire last 30 days to get that code out. And I'm really tired. So I'm going to take a 2-week vacation. So we're going to be late delivering your code. Yeah, we'll buy it from somebody else. No, not useful. So don't buy into that. I'm not saying you should be an evil jerk and grind your people. You need to work hard enough to succeed. That's the way life works. Imagine that you were at Google at the early days and you wanted to be a 9 to 5er. Well, number one, you wouldn't be at Google. And number two, you wouldn't have that Google stock. And so we used to say when I was an entrepreneur, we'll sleep when we're dead. The reality is you get plenty of sleep after liquidity. So it's not forever, but your young years, and entrepreneurs tend to be young, not always. I've funded entrepreneurs that are older than me. But by and large, the rigor of being a founder is generally borne better by those that can handle going without sleep for a little bit longer
Yes.
than I can, because I like to sleep. Tenacity is absolutely critical. And last one, it is very hard to think your way into the right idea. I've seen it done, but it's extremely rare. Usually the best ideas find you. They grab you by the throat. They will not let you go.
As you go. Yes.
That's the idea you want to pursue. If you
Yes.
just make a list of 100 ideas and pick the best one, that's tough. I mean, maybe you make the list of the best ideas and you research the top 10 and then you discover something. I do have a very successful entrepreneur that did that. He researched and researched and researched and researched. And one day he heard something that surprised him. And he was like, wow, wow is required. Wow is required to raise money. Wow is required to run a business. Wow is required to have something worth doing. Remember, this is a very long journey. 10 years from now, one of the options is you fail all the way to zero. Okay, I've seen that happen. I have a company called Amana Health, just went public after 12 years. At the same time, I've got another company I funded around the same time that just shut down. So, total failure. Which one? You don't know until the bitter end. I don't care how well the funding rounds go. So you better care enough about what it is that you're doing to do it with everything you've got, which is why people generally tend to say missionaries do better than mercenaries. And that you need something that drives you. That northern star is critical, but what is it that you need? I don't care what you want. We all want all kinds of stuff, but what is it you need to do in your life? And when you find that, and you are, because you remember when you asked me about like pushing through versus pivoting, and I said, well, pushing through is always important. I mean, I go to a conference, which is one way I find leads, and the conference ends, I don't go back to the hotel, hang out and have a cocktail and go to sleep or watch a movie. I say to myself, get out there and find every party that might have other entrepreneurs in it. And then if I'm at a party at 11 o'clock at night and I find out of another party, I don't say, oh, I'm really tired. I really want to go to bed. I say, dude, maybe that's where the thing is. Let's get over to that party. And I get in that Uber and I drive another 20 minutes down the strip and I go in that party. Now, if that party stinks, I go home and I go to bed. I will go to bed. Don't work hard just to work hard. Work hard when it makes sense to do it, right? That was something I did have to learn. I want to lead from the front. And sometimes I felt like my leading from the front was being there late no matter what. You're late in the office because you need to be, not just so people can see you there. You work on the weekends when you need to. One of the other phrases we used to have, other than we'll sleep when we're dead, was Monday through Fridays for keeping up with the competition, weekends and holidays are for beating them or for pulling it. Right? Like, business is war. Right? You have lots of enemies out there. They're trying to take your land from you. Man, I hope you're not competing with a Chinese company where the standard is 7 days a week and probably, a solid 10 hours a day, because they're not going home on the weekend just because their competitors are American. It varies by community. It varies by culture. But if you want to do something great, and by the way, if you don't want to do something great, why would you do it? Right? Like, it's not easy. It's not fun. All right, here's the last point I'll make on this, because it's more looking backwards to learn for somebody that's thinking about it now. I believe entrepreneurship is like childbirth. We've had 3 kids. I was in the room for all of them. I think if any woman remembered how truly painful it is to deliver a baby, everybody would have 1 child and no more. But as soon as that baby attaches, looks in their eye, there's that bond. It's just wonderful. And all the pain
Goes away.
disappears. And then miraculously, a couple years later, you have a second. And in our case, a third. Okay, fine. Entrepreneurship is similar, because when you've succeeded in entrepreneurship, somehow most of that pain goes away and only the glory stays. And you're like, I want to do that again.
Yes, yes.
I've always been somewhat honest with myself about how hard it was. I would have liked to do it again. But the other issue that kicks up for second-time entrepreneurs is they want to prove they were good, not just lucky. Luck is required. I don't care how good you are. Without luck, luck is timing. Friendster versus Facebook? I don't know which part of it didn't work, but some part of it was luck, right? Maybe it was meeting the right guy, not the president, maybe his first investor. I don't know. You'll never know until afterwards. And even then you might not. I have plenty of entrepreneurs who don't remember the critical thing that I thought was the reason that things changed a lot. And they thought it was because they were so smart, they figured it out. Because all of a sudden it was all on you in your own. It is all on you. But all the credit goes to you too. So sometimes that can go to your head. Anyway, it's hard. Don't do it unless you're willing to suffer. And don't do it if it's not something great and phenomenal that you're going to be proud of when you're done. Right? Because you're going to give it 10 years. Okay? 10 years. Or, by the way, you fail really quickly. John Doerr used to say your lemons ripen first. You can fail in a year. You can't succeed in one. So think about that before you.
Well, this brings us back to tenacity. Ben, thank you for being on Opening Pathways today. Tell my viewers a little again about you, what you do.
Sure. So Ben Narasin, I run Tenacity Venture Capital. I'm the founder and general partner. We write $1 to $3 million checks into seed and very occasionally into pre-seed companies. We invest in tech, with the exception of med tech, security, and crypto. Anybody that wants to pitch me can. In fact, it says right on my LinkedIn, pitch, but be careful. If you read my LinkedIn profile and pitch me, I'll respond. If you don't, I'm just going to send you a picture of my LinkedIn profile. It says we don't do security, med tech, or crypto, so don't pitch me those things, which people do all the time, which tells me with absolute certainty they didn't read anything I put on my profile, since it's only 2 lines long. And it says 1-line elevator pitch with your ARR, I read all. What I get is 7 paragraphs, usually for crypto, and I send a picture of that with a circle around it. And if they're at least gracious about it, like, oh, haha, you're right, I didn't see that. Really, you didn't see that when you used a robot to spam me? Okay. But I'm happy to respond to it. I do the same thing on Twitter. I'm at bnarrison, and I respond there. I mean, I read all my emails, I read all my Twitters, I read all my LinkedIns. It is not hard to get a pitch in front of me. And again, if you follow my profile model, I will respond to it. If you give me the long thing, I won't. If you say, but here's a hack. If you say, if you're interested, let me know. And I'm not interested, I'm not going to let you know. I'm very literal. Then when you write me later and say, bumping this up to the top, I'm like, why? You said, if I was interested to let you know, and I wasn't, so I didn't. I'm confused. Like, be
Yes.
careful what you ask for, right? Be precise, be concise, and it usually works out well.
Some good wisdom today. Ben, thank you for being on the show.
I
And
appreciate
to
it.
my viewers, this is Opening Pathways with Tom Lenoble. I'll see you next time.